So
Absolutely.
I was very happy the way in which you presented the whole thing. So yeah, so
That's
yeah, we will look forward that how best that we
Please,
can move on. Yeah,
please, let's have some more conversation.
sure, definitely we will. So Dr. Thalojan, so far we have 47 participants. What time we can start? Now it is 5:35. What's the plan?
I think we can start.
Yeah. So
We can start,
yeah, we
isn't
can
it?
start.
Yeah, others will join because Indian standard time is Indian stretchable time. That's our habit. We are habituated to that. If you keep on waiting, people will stretch us. So let us start. That would be great.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
A very good evening to everyone present here. I am Rujita Khanna from Mental Health Action by People. Hope you've all had a satisfying day, and I welcome you all to the last day of our training on de-escalation, where we also have today Dr. Girish, who is the chairperson of MAP. Deborah Horowitz, ma'am, she is a licensed mental health professional and a clinical training specialist. She has had an experience of more than 25 years and has helped us go through the wonderful training program for the past 4 days. We really thank you for that, ma'am. And I also believe that I and everyone present here is very lucky to have got a chance to get associated with you, ma'am. I would also like to mention that I will be monitoring the chat. So if you have any questions as you go, please feel free to put it on chat. We can pause for questions so that Deborah ma'am and Dr. Girish are able to take questions and nothing is missed. So without taking much of anybody's time, I invite Dr. Tarlochan Singh, who is our organizing secretary of MAP. So please begin your presentation. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Rajita. So I welcome you all on the behalf of Mental Health Action by People. So MAP is an NGO that aims to promote well-being and quality of life of fellow men by proactive intervention in community health, community mental health. The MAP is a registered charitable organization in Government of India. So MAP has done several projects on mental health at national and international level and having its chapters in all the states. So the Mental Health Action by People is growing platform for connecting people, network and organization for sharing resources and for building knowledge related mental health and psychosocial support, both in emergency setting and in the situation of chronic hardship. So we aspire to building and shaping good practice in support of people affected by difficult events and circumstances. So MAP also run a MAP Academy where we regularly invite nationally, internationally acclaimed trainer, clinician to impart knowledge and practical skill to budding psychologists and people who are interested in mental health care. So this program is also part of Mental Health MAP Academy program. So today, as Rajita just told, we are doing this certificate training course in de-escalation by Deborah Horowitz. So today is the last day. So today we have a specific topic that is first aid model for violent episodes. So the trainer is Deborah Horowitz. She is an energetic, highly skilled, licensed clinical social worker with 25 years of experience as a clinician, as a researcher, educator in the healthcare, and specifically in the crisis management. She's professionally trained in dialectical behavior therapy, cognitive behavior therapy, and she has many accomplishments, include that she is a primary researcher and lead author of two very popular curriculum, that is Safety, Hope, and Healing. That is a multi-programmed approach to mental health care. And she's also a primary author, first author, for psychosocial determinant of violence and trauma-informed implication for treatment. And she has another book and practical manual on her name, that is Psychosocial Approaches to Violence and Aggression. So likewise, she has done extensive work on violence, aggression, and crisis management. So we are indeed feeling honored to have you as a trainer, ma'am. So I also welcome Dr. Krishnan Girish, who is the founder president of MAP, a clinical psychologist with almost 35 years of experience of practicing psychotherapy and psychosocial management in India. He is a former president of Indian Association of Clinical Psychologists and celebrated clinical psychologist, and received many prestigious awards by government and non-government agencies. So he is the chairperson today. So I request Dr. Krishnan Girish, so please inaugurate this session formally and say a few inaugural words and allow us to start the session. Over to Dr. Girish, sir.
So good evening, a very good evening to all of you, my dear friends. First of all, it is my privilege to have with us Deborah Horowitz and Nancy. I have not read the full name, but I've seen her throughout all the sessions, very active person. Nancy, yeah. Nancy, my good friend, Talojan, and my friend Rijita Khanna, and so many other MAP members and learners on the journey who are all interested in learning for the services to be done. So I've been there with one or two sessions of Deborah, but I found that she's, though she's a clinical social worker, I found that she has got a very strong social perspective, which takes her beyond the clinical, so-called clinical, I would say. And I felt that she is also a person with a lot of, a kind of social action model, the way in which she approaches the whole issue. I felt that she is a strong advocate of social action model who doesn't want to limit herself within the clinic, the four walls of clinic as a clinician. And that's really great of her. And the kind of in-depth perspective she has thought on various things like violence, trauma, and related aggression, all that is really very comprehensive, multi-dimensional. And that's actually the need. That's how it should be. So in nutshell, I would say the whole presentation has got a heuristic value, also very much practical value as well, especially during this particular time. And I was just talking to my good friend Deborah, and I was telling her that this is a time that we are going through is called, totally volatile, unorganized, unstable environment. We can predict, we cannot predict what is going to happen next day. So this sort of a training has got a very, very practical significance as far as anyone who is in mental health or a health scenario is concerned. So there's maybe counselors, psychologists, social workers, clinicians, psychiatrists, because you are being with the people who may get aggression. It's not because of their fault, because of the phase through which they're going through, and you must know how to do a de-escalate without further harm to either to you or to the person concerned. So the techniques of de-escalation is of very, very great practical value. At the same time, the theoretical underpinnings of all this has got much wider, perspective. Like sometimes it is transgenerational, it is transcultural, and how trauma, all that are buried deep into the very the build of the person's or generations concerned. So all this you need to have a very in-depth insight. Then only probably you may be able to apply that in the theoretical model as we are doing it. So there is a need to have kind of going in hand with this kind of a theoretical comprehensive in-depth or insight, which is translated into pragmatics as well. So I'm sure that today's session you all will definitely learn a lot, enjoy the session, and she's a very strong person. I understand that she doesn't just talk, but she communicates. And she communicates mostly non-verbally. I understand that she is a wonderful trainer as well, because communication doesn't mean verbal. Sometimes words could be non-verbal, anti-communication as well. But I found here is a person who can really motivate to take you further towards the where you are supposed to move. So with these words, let me complete and conclude my what is called chair's address, whatever it is. So it is very important that I must give time to our presenter. So over to you, Deborah. I'm sure that you are going to rock today's session as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Girish and Dr. Singh and Rijita. I'm so pleased to be here. This is our last session in the series. We're going to talk about what happens after an unfortunate event. And I want us to be able to think together about how we set up structures to help deal with the aftermath of those. And I'm going to share with you today what the Department of Mental Health has designed. It's called the First Aid Support Team, or FAST, and how that sort of looks. And then I want us to sort of think together about, from your perspective, where you are, how might you best support your colleagues after something traumatic occurs. So I'm going to share my screen. So this has been a lovely opportunity for INDEAR and MAP to really collaborate and connect. I felt throughout these sessions a real synthesis of purpose and understanding. And so I really want to talk today about that aftermath, that unfortunate event, and what it means to have compassion fatigue, but also compassion satisfaction. How do we get back into the work that we're doing and still feel engaged and still want to provide a service for others after we ourselves have been hurt? So we want to identify the differences between compassion fatigue, vicarious and secondary trauma, and burnout. Often people use these words interchangeably, and there are some differences. I also want us to think about our own individual well-being after an event. What is it we ourselves need? And what do we need to ask for after an event? Oftentimes people who are in fight, flight, or freeze mode and are helpers sometimes feel very ashamed to ask for help because we're supposed to know it all. We're supposed to fix it all. And here we are suffering in silence. And so part of this is normalizing and understanding the ways that trauma is a human experience. Then we're going to talk about what colleagues can do for one another. And we'll do that through the FAST team model. We do know that our medical and mental health care workers are not immune from the painful effects of violence. After an event, staff are often feeling unsettled and uncomfortable and are experiencing the hypervigilance or post-traumatic stress symptoms or acute stress reactions. But they're also in that moment also dealing with the same institutional and structural mechanisms. If there's no mechanism to report the event to your superior or your supervisor, if there's no way in the legal system to have your voice heard if there's an assault, those things are structural mechanisms, again, keeping that ideology in place of who matters and who doesn't. If wounded healers continue to practice, they're more at risk to be re-traumatized, and those around them are at risk to be traumatized, trying to protect that person. So we must find a level of safety for healthcare workers so that they themselves can still feel safe to treat others. And so here we're looking at not labels, not categories, but people and what happens when they're exposed to violence. The scope of the problem in healthcare workers is of a very large magnitude, okay? Here's an example of some of the reasons why hospital workers will leave, right? 13% get better opportunities. But look at the difficulties that individuals have with their immediate supervisor. And look at the benefits and compensation versus the workload. We're not all getting wealthy in this field. It's not part of where we understand our purpose. However, we are still impacted by the way policies and procedures are written and whether we're allowed to participate in them, in the development of them. The way we work with our coworkers has a lot to do with burnout and the level of treatment and respect. So this is just without a pandemic. This is just the baseline or the bell curve. Here's your current attrition rate. You are losing almost 20% of your healthcare workers right now. And that is a shame. Not because the people have decided and made a decision to leave. But because we have not addressed all of the reasons by which they feel they need to leave, we have up and coming generations of doctors who may not want to actually practice after they get out of medical school because of the fear, because of the institutional and structural violence. We may have people retiring much, much earlier than they thought they might because they are feeling burnt out. What we're really aiming to do is to bring this attrition rate down, to re-engage with our healthcare providers, because this is what's happening in India. 56% of the doctors do not get enough sleep. 57% have thought of hiring security on their premises, but may not have the resources to do it. And a whopping 62.8% of the doctors felt that they were unable to see their patients without violence. That's unconscionable. There has to be a baseline level of safety. And so what are the mechanisms that healthcare providers and healthcare workers need to put in place? We've spent the last 4 days talking about the structural and institutional mechanisms down to what happens directly. And what I want us to understand is that what is happening to individual doctors and providers has larger implications societally. And what is happening societally has larger implications for our doctors and healthcare workers. So right now, where you can't predict a lot, where there's a lot of uncertainty, the SCARF model where status and relatedness are at a giant chasm, as is autonomy and fairness. People are not feeling heard. There are very limited options. The status has become something of a barrier. And so we find that that is all leading to this attrition rate. Because what is happening is that day in and day out, trauma is pervasive and it crosses all of our life domains. It just doesn't stay in the workplace. If someone's hurt in the workplace and there is not support to mitigate it, it will leak into the family. I've seen a number of providers get divorced, lose their children, move out of their homes, switch careers altogether as a result of having unmitigated trauma experience. This trauma that we're experiencing is deep and often life-altering. It is already difficult to deal with the concept of death, which doctors and healthcare providers do every day. But death during a pandemic of this magnitude with this level of limited resources has a life-altering effect on not only the healthcare worker, but the patient and the patient's family. The other thing we know is that if we don't address the initial trauma, it is likely to be repeated. And this repeated exposure then leads to vicarious traumatic symptoms that lead to leaving the workforce. So we have to think about trauma for us because it actually impacts the way we would approach people or avoid helping relationships. We have a number of physicians who are traumatized who do not want to go back and meet their patients or who are kept away from their working with their patients by community members not allowing them either near their homes or near their workplaces, right? The trauma often occurs in the context of your work, but it can also be not related to your work. You too could be traumatized by something that's happening in your family that has nothing to do with the work that you're doing. And yet not addressing that as well brings that into the working relationship. So what we're talking about here is a human need to have a baseline level of safety because it affects all of us and not just in public and private service settings. I will say that the disparity, the inequity between public health, hospitals, and private sector services is gigantic here in the US, and I understand it's also problematic over there. The ability to access resources, the ability to understand what is available, the mechanisms to get to those places, all have everything to do with those structural mechanisms about who matters and who doesn't. And that is all weighing very heavily on us every day right now. So what I want us to remember is that pain is inevitable. There will always be potholes. There will unfortunately always be death and dying. There will always be some kind of trauma that occurs. But what we do, the suffering is optional. That's where the first aid support team comes in. Yes, you're going to experience that pain, but the meaning you attach to it, how quickly it's mitigated, how much support you have, reduces the fear, the anger, and the shame, which we talked about all the way through this session, so that suffering is minimized. Because here's what happened. We originally get this painful experience that brings us fear and sadness and shame and anger. And then we detach a meaning. And so what you can see is the self-talk we tell ourselves. Buckle up, Buttercup. It's part of the job. Time heals all things. I don't need to talk about this with anybody because nobody would understand. I'm all alone in this. No, I can't do this anymore. All of those are the aftermath effects of the painful event. And if we get in there right at the painful event, we can mitigate the spread of it into that person, that incubation period. In what we talked about in the very first session about how this is all transmitted, right? If this pain sits in a petri dish of fear, anger, and shame, it grows until it spreads out and infects the next part of the process. So what we're doing here is an intervention right when the event happens. Because all of this does not have to break us. We often think, oh my goodness, I just can't handle this anymore. There are ways that we can be exposed to pain and sometimes the unspeakable, which we do see. But adverse reactions are not a given and they don't have to be permanent. And that's where the hope lies. The hope is that we can recover and be resilient from this and go back and do our jobs and have full, rich, meaningful lives, as long as we're doing the things that we need to calm the part of the brain that is active in us, right? And also to recognize where those structural and institutional mechanisms are operating and find ways to mitigate those. Here's what it means to when we think about our professional quality of life overall, right? We think about the rewards we get from our job, right? When somebody tells you, I've never said this to anybody before, we feel really good. When somebody says, thank you for saving my son, right? Or I couldn't have done this without you. We feel compassion, satisfaction. We have dopamine dumping and serotonin dumping, which is the well-being neurotransmitters. And when we feel compassion, satisfaction, as you saw in the Science of Kindness video, that gets transmitted to other people. Compassion fatigue is when we cannot give anymore. It's like trying to get water out of a stone. You are completely depleted. And then it can look like burnout. Burnout is related to systemic pieces, and we'll talk about that. And compassion fatigue often relates to secondary trauma, is a part of secondary trauma. So we've talked about compassion being the off switch for fear in somebody who's escalating. Now I'm asking for something we don't often do as helpers. Compassion towards ourselves. Often the things that we say to ourselves are worse than the things anybody would ever say to us. And so we have to take a look at ourselves with that compassion and recognize that we are human. We are not just healthcare workers. We are not just doctors. We are people and people who may be hurt. And then we have to say to ourselves, how can I understand my distress and another's distress with the willingness to alleviate it? So now we're turning this compassion lens on ourselves to mitigate the fear and the anger and the shame that arises from an event where we ourselves are hurt. So this compassion fatigue is this tension that we have, and we get preoccupied with the suffering of those being helped, so much so that it traumatizes us. How many of you, and you can just sort of put it in the chat or give a thumbs up, have thought about something that you did at work all day and brought it home and kept thinking about it and thinking about it and thinking about it and wondering if you did the right thing or if you completed it or what you could have done differently or what's waiting for you next? So if any, yes, absolutely, right? Thank you. So we often do this, more so than we recognize. So part of what we have to understand as healthcare workers is how to leave work at work and how to be home at home. And so when we feel so depleted and there's nothing left to give, we begin to do this rumination process that is a drain. And what is activated there is the limbic system and all of the feelings associated with that. And so we need to reset the tape that's running in our heads. And there are a number of ways to do this, and we can sort of talk about what you've tried as we go forward. The symptoms of compassion fatigue may or may not be obvious. Oftentimes trauma, the initial trauma is obvious, right? Maybe there's a bruise on us or a broken bone, but oftentimes it's not. Oftentimes it's not what we see. We can't see it. We can't see the trauma. However, absence of proof is not proof of absence. It actually is impacting us. We'll see it in the way our bodies carry it, with difficulty sleeping, changes in appetite, not less desire to take care of ourselves, like even shower or do our daily activities. We may not want to be intimate with our partners, and we may very well also be on that escalation continuum with outbursts of anger or irritability, or we may shut down and withdraw from people, and people may or may not notice. We also then have difficulty concentrating because here we are, we're so depleted that the neocortex, that problem-solving part of the brain, isn't available to us the way it would be if we were at our baseline. So we may also see people right after an event say, oh, no, I'm fine. I see this all the time. I'm fine, I'm gonna finish my shift. No, I'm not really hurt. Except that they really are hurt, and sometimes they don't know they're even bleeding because that adrenaline is dumping, that fight, flight, or freeze mode is dumping. So I want you to sort of think that compassion fatigue takes many, many forms, and it looks different in many people. So what you're looking for is sort of some of these and all of these. The more of these that you have, the more important it is that you refuel your compassion. All right, so let's talk a little bit about the differentiation. Compassion fatigue is different from burnout. Compassion fatigue can happen either gradually or immediately, but burnout has a gradual onset. Burnout usually relates to systemic issues, difficulties with supervisors, lack of resources, time constraints that are unattainable. Those are what makes for a burnout in a staff member. So many people leave the field not because they don't feel as if they could help again to their person served or patients, but because the systemic barriers are so great that they can't move. And that's burnout. Secondary trauma has this rapid onset, this immediate exposure, and has all of the hallmarks of what happens with our patients. There's fear, there's preoccupation. It's often associated with a particular event in the moment. And it also is doesn't bear in mind that there's secondary trauma, but there's direct trauma. When our staff are assaulted, somebody mute themselves, please. When there is, I think we should pause.
Mira, I think mic is on.
Okay. There's direct trauma for our staff. It actually has happened to them. It's not a result of exposure to somebody else's stress. So our staff are dealing with both direct trauma and secondary trauma, and that gets compounded. We know that stress is cumulative. It is not countertransference. Secondary stress and trauma is about a physiological response in us, a fight, flight, or freeze response. Countertransference has to do with our feelings about the patient. We may have feelings about them, but it is not that same kind of physiological response. We don't get that when we think about or work with that person. And then we differentiate it slightly from vicarious trauma. So what affects compassion fatigue? Well, when your work-life balance is disrupted, how many of you are working way more than 8 hours a day? Give me the thumbs up, put your hand up. Put it in the chat, whatever you'd like. Right now in the pandemic, all of us are working much harder than we used to, right? Doctors, I understand, are not sleeping, are working 23 hours a day, seeing 250 patients in a day. That does not allow for a work-life balance. And by the way, this notion of work-life balance really doesn't get to the heart of it. What we need is to understand that work is part of the life balance, right? It's not one or the other. Because oftentimes people feel, well, I have to choose. I have to choose between my family and my social circle and my work. So when we're talking about how we mitigate trauma, we have to understand that work is a part of life. It's not separate from. When we are seeing and working with a lot of traumatic content, many of you are clinicians, many of you sit with people who are hurt and who are sharing their pain with you. And you are working diligently to manage that traumatic content with them at the same time that you're working to keep your boundaries in place and not become a sponge to bringing that in. And when your caseload suddenly becomes really heavy with people who are massively in crisis, the ER people, emergency responders, first responders, small hospitals or nursing homes where you are, larger public hospitals, even the private hospitals are seeing an uptick, although not as much as the public hospitals or the smaller nursing homes. And why? There's this disparity, again, the institutional and structural barriers. So those are impinging upon you if you work in one of these sites, and you become more exposed to traumatic situations. So here we are. Those in the helping professions are generally more self-sacrificing. We genuinely want to help. Many of us got into this field because we wanted to help or were expected to help, right? We are often confronted with dangerous situations, not only the life and death of the patient, but because they have attendants, because there are workers around that may have difficulties. We often do this thing, we work till it hurts. We work and work and work till we can give no more. The problem with this is that if you do that, you're so depleted you don't want to come back and may not come back. So people who will work until it hurts generally are like stars. They explode. They're good for a while, they work really well, and then they just explode because there's nothing left to give, and then we've lost them. So part of it is to say, we are not indispensable. And that's hard for us to sit with. It's hard for our status and our ego to recognize that we are not the ones that are going to keep the world spinning if we stop doing what we are doing and take a nap or go home and see our kids. So it's really a shift in mindset that we're moving from we can fix it all, we're invincible, to the world is going to keep spinning if we don't do this particular thing. When we skip work breaks or work late, when you are hungry, angry, lonely, tired, or thirsty, a big 5, you become less effective at your work. If you don't satisfy your most basic drives, then you are not available to be present truly with another person. When we ignore our own warning bells, we do this a lot. We spend a lot of time talking ourselves out of that, oh my gut feeling says, well, no, that can't be true, right? We need to pay attention to those warning signs and then act accordingly. When we don't have adequate supervision, when we don't have people we can turn to, when we don't have experts to help us through, when we refuse to delegate, this is a big one, right? This is mine, and I have to do it all. Somebody
ಅಲ್ಲೇನೋ ಇಲ್ವಾ ಬೇರೆದೇನ್ ತರಕ ಹಂಗೆ ಹೇಳಿ ಕಳ್ಸಿರು ಆಮೇಲೆ
can that person mute? Thank you. When we don't take time off, I am often working with clinicians who have hundreds and hundreds of hours of holiday time or benefit time, and they don't take it. They don't take it. Now, I'm not clear on exactly how that system works in India, but the idea is that you need time to yourself. You need time with your family. And we kind of have to rotate assignments when your caseload gets so overwhelmed. Who else can you turn to? So that's all of the things that we as healthcare providers impose upon ourselves. Now add a traumatic event, and you can see then what might happen. That burnout where people are unhappy, they feel disconnected. They get up in the morning and they go like this, oh, I just don't want to go to work today. I can't believe I have to see so-and-so. That feeling. When there's insensitivity to the work environment, this is when you are exposed to trauma regularly and your alarm and bells and whistles go off all the time, like a fire drill. So if you go to a fire drill and then it rings and you exit the building the first time, great. By the 5th or 6th time that the bell rings, the drill, people are saying, it's just a drill, I don't have to leave. That's what's happening here. The trauma is so pervasive and so unmitigated that in order to survive it, we literally have to shut off parts of ourselves. And when we do that, we lose our ability to connect with others and to have empathy. And that could very, very well leave us open or vulnerable to an escalating event. And when we feel bogged down or stuck, when we don't know which way to turn, we don't know which way is up, and when we don't have our own sustaining beliefs and practices, when we don't have a plan for how we bring joy into our lives. But the good news is we can turn it around. At the moment, I'm going to pause here, and I want people to comment in the chat. Do you have any questions about that? What's been your experience of that, of the things we've been talking about? Rumination is very common, absolutely. How do you refuel your compassion? Beautiful. So we can talk about that. We're going to talk about that very shortly. Other thoughts from people? Yes, sometimes you don't even know it. Burnout is actually, you often don't see any of it happening until it's, you're at the point where this is my last straw. Are people still with me?
Here's a good question, Deborah. How do we not become desensitized?
Ah, that's beautiful. Part of the way we don't become desensitized is to have significant replenishing experiences outside of that, so that your body still recognizes that your work environment, that's an abnormal situation. That's an entirely artificial creation. So it is so necessary that you have a contrasting event or life so that you can see the dissonance, the difference between the two. When you can't see the forest for the trees, that becomes the problem. So having something that is poignant and contrasts that experience of work is vital to you to be able to see it for what it is and not shut it down. Other questions, thoughts?
Someone here mentions music as a healing.
Oh, goodness. Yes, music works on so many levels. Music changes our mood. It changes our brain chemistry. We can use it to help us sleep. Because it targets both sides of the brain, it is a way that we can feel synthesized and whole, right? So music is absolutely wonderful in helping us become more mindful and bring those two parts of the brain together. Other thoughts and questions?
People are mentioning comedy, yoga, setting healthy boundaries, meditation.
Absolutely, absolutely. A word about comedy, right? Laughter. So anybody who has seen a dog go into water, right? When it comes out, it does that shake it off, shake it off, shake it off thing. It does that and it dispels tension. So when we laugh wholeheartedly, we are literally discharging the physiological tension in our bodies. So laughter is absolutely amazing. Not only does it discharge the tension, but it's also found to increase the immune system, and it helps us shift perspective. So it's absolutely a gift. Laughter is wonderful. The more of that we get, yes. Meditation, yoga, mindfulness practices, absolutely. Other thoughts before we go on?
There's a mention of conversation with friends.
Beautiful, absolutely. Here's the thing I'm going to say about conversations with friends. Conversations with friends not in the field with you. If you have all your friends are in the field with you, then what you're going to talk about is work when you get there. In order to create that space where you are able then to see the difference between what's going on at work and what's going on in the rest of the world, having that conversation with friends in a supportive way is absolutely vital. Friends are a huge part of the recovery process, and part of the reason why we use peers and colleagues to do the first aid response is because we're walking in their shoes, because they see us also socially. So it's very powerful. Other thoughts, concerns, questions?
Wonderful ideas keep coming in about how to manage and be healthy, including crafts, which I personally like, and writing, which helps in letting it out.
Absolutely. So crafts are great because they have a sense of accomplishment when you're done with them. And it has a beginning, a middle, and an end. And oftentimes the work we do doesn't have a beginning, a middle, and an end, or a sense of accomplishment. So crafts are very, very important. And what was the other one, Nancy?
There's writing.
Writing. Okay.
Yes. Yeah.
Writing
Go ahead.
Writing and journaling is really important because, again, once you say it, once you put it out loud, it becomes more real, and then you can deal with it. You can manage it. You can bring that observer mind to your experience. So writing is really very, very helpful in ways that allow us to discharge it. I will also say that one of the things that does help people who are sort of doing this rumination over and over and over again, and they can't seem to discharge it, is to make what I refer to as, you can call it what you like, but it's sort of this God box. So you make a box with a hole in it, and then when you have that thing that you're running through your head, you write it down on a piece of paper, and you put it in the box, and you save it for later. That way, you know you can come back to it if you need it, but you don't have to keep going, because there it is. It's right there in the box, safe and sound. And if you need it again, you can go get it. So that's also one of the techniques that people can use.
And we have a very important question from Sakshi here. Can the feeling of not having enough time and space in the day, the feeling of emergency habit in the nighttime, foregoing sleep, could that be called a symptom of burnout?
That could be a symptom of burnout, but it sounds to me like it's also compounded with some kind of secondary trauma that you're experiencing. That sense of urgency, the overload with the number of cases, but the systemic piece is burnout. But so the thing is that burnout and vicarious trauma don't have to be separate. You can be experiencing both. One more question, if there is one, and then we'll move on.
Here's a good question. How do you deal with a closed up leader?
So dealing with somebody who is, well, actually, I should ask for more information. What do you mean by closed up?
That is a question from Harjinder. Did you want to add to that?
Yes, the thing is that closed up leader is somebody who doesn't really think about the boundaries that you keep, is just always demanding and putting you down in case that you want to do any self-care, or you are assertive, or you are asking for, you're presenting yourself, yes, I need this time out, but the leader or the head or the manager is just not ready to listen to that.
Okay, that is a seminar in itself, actually, but a wonderful, wonderful question. How do you do this in a system that doesn't support you? And we've been dealing with that with F.A.S.T for quite some time. Part of it is finding a way to present it in such a way to your manager that it appears as a gift rather than an additional burden or demand. There are conversational intelligence techniques that I'm also trained in that help that manager understand his emotional intelligence quotient in order to be more open. So there are a lot of coaching techniques that help with this dynamic. And it is not an uncommon dynamic. So if that's something that you are interested in learning how to do, we can talk about that at another point. I'm happy to do that. I do provide coaching around that. Okay. Let's go on. Okay. Let's turn it around. Your factors that affect your own resiliency. You've said so much in the chat. I'm so grateful that you're realizing that things that you do and things that will get better, right? That we have this belief that this will pass. Our teenagers often are unable to abstract at that level. And so when something happens to them, they think that it will never, ever, ever, ever get any better because they can't see beyond what's happening now. So keeping in mind that this will pass, and that we have been through difficult things in the past. When we're in the middle of something, we often fail to remember that we were in difficult situations before and we're able to get out. And FAST is really about pointing that out, that you have been through other negative events and what has worked to help you feel better and be able to continue the work. So we're sort of helping people shift perspective from that this is terrible, it will never get better, to you really do have opportunities for growth. When we're trying to set goals that are personally relevant to us, to speak to the last question a bit, when we have a goal like engaging in self-care, and we're coming up against someone who doesn't believe that should be a goal at all, or that your goal that you should be going doesn't feel relevant to you, that can affect our ability to be resilient. And so that can lead to some burnout. We need to talk about that. The things that you were just saying that you do on your own, that gives you some sense of mastery, is absolutely wonderful. Please, 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 please keep doing those, right? Those will also help save your life. And the ability to see the positive and the negative. What have I learned from this? Oftentimes we feel we're sitting in that fear, anger, and shame because of the event, that we can fail to see that this may be an opportunity for us to recognize something important in ourselves and in the other person. And our spiritual beliefs. You just went through a wonderful festival, and culturally relevant and spiritual beliefs, and the belief that there is something bigger out there than us takes away that feeling, or helps mitigate the feeling that we have to save the world, that we're indispensable. We are not indispensable. There is something greater than us. Having a group of colleagues feels greater than us. Having a group work on the structural mechanisms. These belief systems can be used to be a resiliency factor for all of you. So compassion satisfaction is the opposite. This is the joy you get from when you sit with somebody who is suffering and helping to relieve their suffering. This is the way in which we can continue to do the work that we do. And there's actually a tool, and it's free, and I'm going to show it to you in a minute. I'll just call it up. It's called the ProQual. And what it does is it lets you take a self-assessment that tells you about your life, where you are in compassion fatigue, in burnout, and compassion satisfaction. So it literally does a rating scale for you to help you figure out where you are, so you can figure out what you need to do to get back to compassion satisfaction. So I'm going to stop sharing this screen for a minute, and I'm going to share the other screen. Hold on one moment, so that you can see what this looks like. Okay, so here is this tool. It's called the ProQual, Professional Quality of Life. And if you remember that sort of flow chart that we gave you, it does this measure of your burnout, your compassion fatigue, and your satisfaction. It is free. It comes in multiple languages, as you can see, in English and in non-English translation. And I invite all of you to take it. It really helped us get a handle on that observer view of where we are, so we know which way to go, what the direction is. So I'm sharing that. Come on. Go back to sharing this. Because compassion satisfaction leads to longevity in the work that we do. I've been in the field now for 25 years, and I have found that if I have not had support, if I have not had opportunities to do things that I have mastery in elsewhere, I probably would have left the field a long time ago. And I say that because I have been hit, I have been kicked, I have been spit at, I have been punched in the course of the work that I've done. I've been sprayed with WD-40 in the face. I don't know if you know what that is, but it's a lock opener. And yet I am still here. And that's what I want our new physicians and new healthcare workers to understand, that you can do this work, it can remain meaningful, and you can do it with a level of safety that I didn't know when I first started back then. Because what we're doing here is this empathic discernment. We're selecting the best responses for our clients and for ourselves, but really it's about finding a way to care about ourselves as much as we care about others. We cannot, again, serve from an empty vessel, and often we are really, really good at caring for others. But if you want to be able to be as effective and as safe as you can be, we really have to care about ourselves as well. Because there is hope. There is absolutely hope. We do not have to stay in the current state of distress that we are in. We do not have to feel alone as we have felt. We do not have to sit with fear, anger, and shame. There are antidotes for that. And so that is what is exciting to me. So FAST is a tertiary prevention strategy, okay? This is when there is a traumatic event that overwhelms the person, right? Overwhelms their social, psychological, physical, cognitive abilities to cope. And we go immediately to that person to mitigate that distress in the moment, with the ideal of bringing people back to their optimal level of functioning as quickly as possible. So this is our logo. It's the FAST, it's the First Aid Support Team. And what this is a peer-to-peer support network. So we are, the people who are supporting us are also working with us. Could somebody please mute? All right, so we have our colleagues who are working next to us, who do the work that we do, understand the complexity of it, be the ones that help us. Here's our vision statement, and I'm sharing this with you because I would like you to begin to think not past what happens in the de-escalation phase to what you may need to put in structurally to help one another. Oy, sorry. So we have put forward this vision statement, and this is what we have presented to leaders. And the First Aid Support Team was created to prevent, recognize, and address those traumatic events in the workplaces. And we are a staff-to-staff, culturally sensitive and confidential service. I urge you to make this a confidential program. So what that means is that we do not answer to or share information with supervisors or leaders or HR or any kind of investigative body. It remains one of the only safe places for people to tell us what goes on in the DMH system. And what we do is we understand the themes that are happening and then systemically work to take out those barriers, the structural and institutional problems that are contributing to this at the same time that we are mitigating it in the individual we're working with. So what we know is that research shows that it is not uncommon. In fact, It's a normal response to an abnormal situation following critical incident where there has been some kind of assault, where those big T's that we've talked about have happened, and also those little T's. Oftentimes what we're responding to now, mostly, is not just that there's been an assault on a physician or a healthcare worker by a patient, but that there is bullying, intimidation, or sabotage happening systemically between teams with a person that, who has to report to a particular supervisor. And we work to mitigate the burnout associated with that. We recognize that on average, most symptoms are temporary, but some really experience the effects later. Oftentimes in the middle of a critical event, what you're seeing is shock in that person. And so FAST is a stabilizing force, because if they don't get assistance, then their work performance declines. Their life connections deteriorate, and then they may end up leaving public service. And when the more people that are leaving public service, that sends a very powerful message to those who are trying to figure out what kind of work they want to do. So if we look at this sort of toolkit model of what is happening to that person, is that there is work-related trauma exposure. Remember that violence is like an infectious disease. So there's an event, there's the exposure. Then it changes, it transmits, and it changes a person's worldview. These are life-altering events. They don't always have to be life-threatening events to be life-altering. It can be a verbal interaction between a person and their supervisor, a person and a team member, that those words, however they come across, have actually a change in your worldview. And then we have sort of this array of responses, right, that we can deal with. We can internalize it and experience it as please mute.
Ma'am, I think you have the option of muting everyone. Please mute all of us, ma'am.
I don't think that I can. I've tried to mute. Let's see. Let's see if I can do that. It is not saying that I can do that.
Then whoever is the host has the option of doing that. Please request the host to do it and spotlight you.
Wait a minute, I got it. I think I got it. Thank you. Thank you for reminding me of that. All right. So then we have, the neutral responses, right? The things that we manage by ourselves and we get back to our routine as quickly as possible. We've sort of bounced back from adversity. But what we're really looking for is this compassion satisfaction. How do we take what has happened to us and incorporate it into our own personal narratives to work for us rather than against us? How do we put this in our narrative where it's no longer driving the bus in a negative way, but that it is allowing us to understand how we need to connect going forward? We know that this approach works, that the earlier we intervene, the faster we can reduce the initial distress from the traumatic event. We can keep it from escalating. We can prevent further psychological injuries. And as we follow the person through their recovery from the event, and we provide psychoeducation and support to help that person recognize and reestablish their coping strategies, we're better able to have them return to their work in an optimal level of functioning where they are then not at such great risk of being traumatized again. We do this in up to 4 contacts. We follow the person's needs and in the way in which they are understanding trauma, and I'll say a little bit more about that. And we also facilitate to other services when it's appropriate. If after the 4th contact, we realize that the person is experiencing post-traumatic symptoms or acute stress reaction symptoms that are not going away, then we are able to help facilitate for more longer term connections. And we do this through our employee assistance programs. We do it through referral to clinicians. And you would have to think about how that might work if you choose to do a model like this, who you need to have connected with in order to facilitate that piece. So this approach, I want to make very clear, is not a debriefing. It is not that you are asking for all of the details. Oftentimes you will see people in fight, flight, or freeze mode, and they may be in shock. So you want to know also how you respond. And I had asked earlier, do you know what you do in a crisis? I myself in a crisis tend to get activated and step forward, right? But if I'm going to respond to somebody who is shut down, then I need to check that activation when I go to that person. Otherwise, I may overwhelm that person even more. We're not looking to get all the details. If people want to share with us the details of what happened, that's fine. What we're doing is mitigating the experience they're having of it. This is not clinical treatment or counseling. So for those of you who are clinicians, it is hard, not impossible, to take off the clinical hat where we want to do all the problem solving and all the diagnosing to just the stabilization phase. For those of you who have been trained in psychological first aid or mental health first aid, that's what we're doing. We're doing that immediate stabilization. Counseling and diagnosing is later on. Not everybody needs this. As we saw in the previous diagram, some people experience the event very neutrally, right? Different people may experience the same event, but experience it very differently. And this is not something that only professionals do. You don't have to have large credentials to do this piece. So at DMH, we have people who are doing this role regardless of what they also do in their work for DMH. So we have people who are facility workers, who work in the mailroom, who are dietary, who are mental health workers, who are also interdisciplinary team members. So we really have a wide array of people who are trained to go in and mitigate the trauma after it happens. But compounding this problem is this belief that violence is part of the job and that we should expect to be hurt and demeaned and humiliated. And we have to change that as an ideology. Constantly, staff are afraid. Staff are afraid they're going to be blamed, that they're going to be deemed incompetent. And that's really difficult, right? Because they're already doing, remember, that negative self-talk to themselves, saying all the horrible things that if somebody else said to them, that would be the end of it, right? So working with them to understand that they do belong in this field. They do have an impact that's positive. They do have the skills because you've seen them in action somewhere else. We also have to remove that barrier that if something happens, that it immediately becomes grounds for a disciplinary action, either termination or suspension or expulsion. That we have to remove as a structural mechanism in the hierarchy. And then we have to figure out what kind of reporting procedures are available. Different facilities have very different ways of capturing this information or finding a way to get it. So one of the things that the biggest things that I see at DMH is when someone is hurt, immediately the supervisor hands them a stack of papers and says, fill this out in triplicate. That is absolutely the wrong time to ask for that information. That person is in fight, flight, or freeze mode. They are not reliable in what they're going to say at that moment because they are traumatized. They may be shaking on top of it because the adrenaline is still dumping, and you're going to get trauma logic. And then at the end of it, later on when they say, well, that's not what you said right after the event. Of course it's not, because that was trauma logic. And now the person is calmer and able to recall more information. That's really important for us to understand. We also have to give people time and space after the event. We need to get them to a private area. We need to do the stabilization piece and not focus so much on the punitive or the reporting aspect. And then we need to be available to them if they are out for a period of time because they've been hurt, and then they come back. We need to be available for them when they come back, because sometimes people don't recognize how traumatized they are till they put the key in the door and walk back into the place where they were hurt. So we make sure that we're available throughout this entire process. So we are a confidential voluntary service. We are staff to staff. We have multidisciplinary team members. We provide coverage 24/7. So if our facilities have 24/7 work going on, we have 24/7 coverage for them. If it's in the community and there are shifts, then we have ways to cover them by shift, by day. So there's we can work to figure out, if you adopt a model or come up with a model, ways in which to get activated and how much coverage you might need. So we use the principles of psychological first aid, but we also use emotional CPR and critical incident stress management. And we believe that this supportive intervention helps eliminate the long-term impacts of trauma. We are now finally in the larger policy of the Department of Mental Health. So the Department of Mental Health has a workplace safety policy. So if you were thinking about a structural mechanism that literally says we must have a tertiary program to mitigate the effects for our staff. So it's official. There's this directive. And that's part of the work that we've had to do as FAST to understand how to remove those obstacles. So what does that mean? That means that the people who are responding are allowed and released from their job when they need to go to mitigate risk. And the leaders have given them leave time on their work shift to come to the 4 hours of training for the initial responders and the 4 hours of training for trauma-informed consultation, and be paid for that by the fact that they're released on their shift day. So leaders have bought into this message. And I've showed leaders why it's so important to buy into this message. And in the training for the FAST responders, I show them what I've showed leadership, so that we're all very transparent and very clear about our mission and are able to have fidelity to the model. Why we're needed is because working with patients and families is hard enough as it is. We are already doing very difficult work, and adding a pandemic on top of it has led to quite a bit of mental health stress and fatigue in our workers. And then add to that we may also be subject to physical, sexual, emotional, psychological, verbal, and racial abuse. We have lots of our staff who are from varying cultures and are people of color are hearing racial epithets and derogatory terms. And we respond to them around that, because there you have it at the institutional level where we have to mitigate the trauma. So that when they come back on the floor and a patient calls them that again, we're intervening. And this helps staff feel really empowered. When I do this training for first responders, it isn't just a training on how to do this, it's really an intervention for them, because often we have to mitigate the trauma that comes into the classroom before we can do the teaching. But then staff feel empowered, and they feel able then to access the service again or tell others how well it worked. And so we have built this thing also through the word of mouth. So what you see with FAST is a grassroots, bottom up, and a top down initiative, and everything in between. So we know people function better when safety is made a workplace priority, when it is on every staff meeting agenda, when supervisors and supervisees talk about it all the time, when the larger organization makes a statement about safety, when they place signage that says, we don't tolerate violence here, which we have done in our hospitals here. We actually have very large signs that say, no violence zone. And we run it like a public health campaign, not just an individual problem between a patient and a physician, as a larger public health issue. And so there is this policy and structural support as well, that we're sharing a common experience with our colleagues, and that they know that there are avenues for help, that they are not alone. Oftentimes we feel so much alone, especially if we are working by ourselves. If we are alone in our practice and people are coming in, but there are not too many other people are around, or if you're working in a nursing home and you're the night shift and it's just you, knowing that there is somebody to call or connect with is important. And then that we are doing it rapidly and reliably. This is really important. Saying you have a program, but then not actually activating it when it's necessary brings down the credibility of the program, right? So if you choose to do something like this and you do want to respond, you have to make sure that A, you have enough responders to do it, and also a mechanism by how people are going to get activated. And here's what we've actually proven in our research. And the Joint Commission of Accreditation for Hospitals over here in the US has designated us as a best practice. So if we look at what the responders have done, we've seen that 62 of them report that the responder actually helped them feel physically safer. 76% felt supported. 73% got the information they needed, right? 91% reported that it was helpful to have somebody normalize their reactions to the situation. And 85% said that the responder helped them not to blame themselves. This program works. We have shown that it is available, and we here in the United States, this FAST team, except for the release time from leaders, have no budget. We operate on zero. This is voluntary work. We get release time. There is no pay for this. And our staff have come in droves. Currently at the hospital where I sit, we have 25 responders available and ready. A larger hospital at Worcester Recovery Center has 45 responders available, because we know that people are going to need us. And so thinking about how you might bring something like this together. So we do provide referrals, we provide that source of support. We hold that hope for our staff. If we hold the hope for our patients, right? That's what we do. We help hold the hope. We're holding the hope, however briefly, until they can re-internalize the hope. Because what we want here is, again, post-traumatic growth, not just for our patients, but for us. And in earlier sessions, we talked about what is it that helps you understand this personal sense of strength. I've lived through this, I've gotten through it, I now have the skills to use it moving forward. And what are the possibilities now? And to have this appreciation, people are incredibly grateful. when we go and we respond to them. It's just heartwarming. And our staff that are doing it voluntarily are doing it because they have the compassion satisfaction and want to share that with another. So we want, when we recruit people, we want people who would be dedicated to doing this, who really believe in the power of this, and who can maintain that sense of confidentiality between the responder and the person served, and perhaps the team leader. And then that responder, we have actually a code of ethics and a standard of conduct that I insist our responders abide by, so that they are getting somebody, the responders are getting somebody who is on and can be present. And that we believe safety is paramount above all, above everything else we do. If there, as Maslow's hierarchy shows us, if there is no baseline of safety, everything else crumbles. And it is absolutely amazing how far you are willing to go when someone believes in you. And we have absolutely seen people who have been very hurt, bruised, battered, traumatized in the course of their job heal with our help and come back into the workforce. So, time for questions, thoughts. I'm open to answering whatever is coming to mind. Nancy, are you with me?
Hi, Deborah.
Oh, I have to
I'm-
unmute everybody again.
Yeah, I'm not getting any chat messages. My internet went out briefly and I'm now not getting any chat. So people will have to unmute and
Okay,
speak.
try unmuting again.
Hi, I have a question. Am I audible?
Okay, I still can't hear you. Hold on one second.
Hi, I have a question. Am I audible?
I hear you, Priya. Deborah, do you hear her?
Nope.
Nope, you're not getting it. I'm hearing.
Shall I write it down in the
Try
chat?
it now, Nancy, and unmute. Working?
Deborah, are you getting me? Can you hear me?
Are you hearing her, Deborah?
I'm asking everybody to unmute.
Yeah, I'm unmuted.
Okay. All right. Let's try it again.
Okay, Deborah, are you hearing me?
It's not unmuting. All right, let's put it in the chat. I'll watch the chat. Okay. Name of that shows unconditional love. So does this include increasing tolerance threshold?
Yeah.
What do you mean
Now
by
you can try
tolerance?
unmuting. Please try to unmute. Now you can
If you
unmute.
don't mind, Virginia, what is it that you're looking for there?
Deborah, this was
And can we unmute and ask, we're trying to get people to unmute, but please put anything in the chat at the moment while I'm trying to figure that out.
Can you hear me, Deborah?
How to deal with situations when there is everyone saying to not say anything. Yes. So this is often what our staff are given by certain members. Middle managers in particular do not want to look bad or look like they are ineffective, and they will frequently try to intimidate or dismiss the workers below them, their direct reports. So one of the things is to have the responder and this program in place where it becomes absolutely a part of the standard operating procedure that you get called, so that it's not the manager who chooses. It is part of the protocol that leadership overarchingly supports. And I can talk more about that as well. I can't hear you. Hold on 1 minute. I have tried to unmute everybody and I am having such, I can't. It's not letting me do it. I wish it were. Just not.
Or you're not hearing us?
All right, well, back to the chat. Yes, rely on the chat, please. How to deal with a person comes up in a session and is emotionally overwhelmed. What should be the first response? Okay, the first response to that is to get that person to a quiet place, to have them recognize whether or not they are bleeding. If they're becoming overwhelmed, getting them something to drink, perhaps a cold cloth to wash their face. You want to get them stabilized first. You've got to calm that reptilian part of the brain. And so places that are loud or public, you need to get them away from first. And all you're going to do in the first session, if you're a responder, is identify who you are and ask them if they want to talk with you. And then physiologically change their perception by giving them something to drink or eat or walk or sit down. And then once that calms down a little, then they can go into the details. And you can just say to them, the first thing we need to do is just get you situated in someplace quiet. Increasing was in relation to factors affecting resiliency. This is not about tolerating more unacceptable behaviors from others. What it is about protecting yourself and your boundaries from the increase in the traumatic exposure. So it's not that you want to increase your tolerance to experiencing trauma. Rather, you want to be able to put in place somewhat of a shield that allows you to continue having other avenues of your life not be impacted. Let's see. At what point in the care pathway are digital interventions most safe and effective? Okay. Digital interventions are fantastic, particularly prior to any event happening. So cell phones are great for this because what you can now do is track people with their cell phones. So you can know exactly where someone is in the moment. And that's really important because if you're a worker who's working alone, having someone know where you are and when you should be finishing whatever it is you're doing or starting whatever it is you're doing is excellent. The other thing that I will say is that in the event you're actually having a crisis and an escalation, to have an open line to your support network. So to kind of have, everybody has in their favorites, right? That's kind of like your speed dial. If you're going into a situation where you feel that this might be something that escalates, the line to the other side, to your supporter on the other end, who can then activate help if something does go wrong. Okay. Now remember, the responders are bound by confidentiality. So it's not a violation then of the work that you're doing. But digital interventions are absolutely beautiful. We also have panic alarms These are alarms that you can wear, that if you are, and we have this in one of our hospitals. So if something happens in one of our hospitals, if we press that panic alarm button, what comes up is where our security desk is. And then they can pinpoint where exactly you are in the hospital and get there immediately. So digital interventions are extremely helpful, and they're not very expensive to use. And most people carry a cell phone. Since we work as mental health professionals, people oftentimes open up way more than we can handle in the situation. It's hard to contain. How do we draw the line? Well, here's the thing. You have to announce to the person that you're responding to what role you're in. You have to explain. So as a clinician, as a therapist, what I use to contain the situation is not always what that person needs just to be stable in the moment. So you need to remind the person that you are here. What can we do now for you? So for example, I'm Deborah Horowitz. I'm your fast responder today. I'm not your training clinician. I'm not your therapist. I want to be able to help you right now. Let's get you stable. So you're setting the tone and the boundary right up front. Let's try it again. Okay. Can burnout or compassion fatigue lead to PTSD? Yes, absolutely, they can lead to PTSD. Anything that is untreated can very much become entrenched, and so absolutely. Okay, let's see. Can people hear me again? I hope still. Keep asking questions. I'm still looking at the chat. We can hear you. Fantastic. I'm glad. I'm so glad. Other thoughts, other questions? Oh, I can hear you too now. Okay. So we must be unmuted somewhere.
You can hear us?
I can hear you. All right. Beautiful. Let's try it again. Now unmute, share your questions with me. Other thoughts, other concerns? How might you use this in your own structure? How might you use this? I know it's a lot of information.
I do have a question.
Please.
So in regards to self-care, does your first aid, I mean, I don't know if it's yours per se, but does the course of first aid have a component of self-care as well?
Absolutely. So the 4-hour training to become a responder has a section directly related to what the responder needs to do in order to keep self-care. Absolutely. It's part of the 4 hours of training that they get. Yes. Other questions?
Hi, Deborah. Can I ask a question, please?
Please.
Yeah. What I wanted to ask was if you can give some specific ways of compassion satisfaction that we can bring it to ourselves, not wait for somebody else to give it to us.
Yes. Yes. So it is part and parcel of finding nuggets of people who can support you and do support you, and who understand how difficult the work is and validate your experience of it. We can't wait for leaders to tell us we're doing a good job, because that takes an awful long time. It's that we know from each other how powerful the work is. And also that we step back from the work periodically and say, is this still my purpose? We have to stay connected to the reasons why we got into this field to begin with. And for me, the way that I do it is I try to have a stance of feeling honored. So for example, it's really easy to feel rewarded when someone is telling you, you've done such a marvelous job, you've helped me so much, I never could have done this without you. We can sit and feel good about that. What we have to understand is that that same opportunity is there when someone is yelling at us, screaming at us, swearing at us, because what they're showing us is their vulnerability. And we are honored to see that level of vulnerability. So I work at it from a stance of being honored that another person is willing to share their deepest pain with me, as well as that piece of, you've done such a great job. And that takes practice and it happens over time, but that's one of the ways that I do it.
Thank you. I think that when you mentioned that when they're yelling at us, it is an honor for me to be there for them at that moment. That's really a good point. Thank you. That really touched me.
Oh, thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I think we had, go ahead.
I just want to know your thoughts about the culture of workaholism that's going around nowadays, and where if we don't act like workaholics, if you don't stay in at work late into the night, then that is seen as a kind of disinterest or a disloyalty towards the work. Saying that, for instance, I myself have faced it many times where there's this sense of guilt that I'm not working hard enough. And even if I do take some time out and take a break and listen to music, I'm not able to really enjoy myself because that guilt keeps creeping up. Do you have any advice for that?
Sure, absolutely. There's this recognition of, so there is this culture of workaholism. It's happening globally. We're a global economy. We're 24/7. I can find anything online in a minute, buy anything with one click. But we're starting to have a wave of people who are saying, enough is enough. I am enough is really hard for healthcare workers to say. I am doing enough. And giving oneself permission in the face of disapproval. I myself have faced that quite a bit. And I have also faced managers and leaders who want to silence that perspective. So it becomes a question of what truly matters to you. Not what matters to them, because they're imposing it on you, but are your values aligned with the mission for them or for you? And this is where this whole notion of coaching becomes really important. So you're working one-on-one with how that person navigates it. So there's an element that I do around just coaching to tackle exactly what you're saying. That in the face of this structural and ideological backlash, whenever I want to take care of me, what do I need to do in that moment? And it's a journey. It's not I wish I could give you just an immediate answer, but it's actually a really personal journey forward. And so coaching and consulting is really important at that point.
Thank you so much. I just have one more question.
So go ahead.
Thank you. In regards to parents who deal with, let's say, autistic children, especially ones who are quite, severe on their spectrum and they show a lot of violent tendencies. I've met a lot of parents who have this terrible amount of, let's say, caregiver fatigue. in those cases, can we still apply this model, or is there something differently structured for them?
You can absolutely use the principles in this model. As we've been talking all the way through in this whole de-escalation, this is a human response. It's not limited to profession. So absolutely, you can use this modality for compassion fatigued parents. Absolutely.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Other thoughts and other questions?
Well, Deborah, what do you think? Are we ready to wrap it up for the day?
I think we are. If you would like any,
ground.
yeah, we've covered a lot. If you would like any more information, I saw Nancy, thank you, put something in the chat to follow up. You can also email me. I will be sending Dr. Singh now all the resources and materials from all of these 5 sessions to disseminate to you. And I just hope that many of you will want to become trainers in this modality, because I've seen it really works, not just for the people you're responding to, but for us. And so part of this is refilling our own bucket in the process of being there for other people. I hope you have enjoyed today. I have enjoyed this whole series immensely. Very much, many thanks to Dr. Singh and Dr. Ganesh. And I really look forward to speaking with all of you or seeing all of you at another point. Thank
Deborah,
you.
thank you so much for a wonderful 5 sessions. It's been very meaningful, and it's been wonderful to connect with so many people and to hear about their personal experiences, as well as you're sharing your own personal experiences, really powerful. And I want to second our thanks for Dr. Singh and Dr. Girish for MAP in general, for providing us with this wonderful platform to connect with people. And they also want to let people know that everybody stay connected for future trainings. And there will be future trainings. And by all means, I hope people will consider joining the Training for Trainers sessions. So on behalf of INDEAR, I just want to say again, thank you for attending, and be well and take care.
Beautiful. Bye.
Bye now.
Nancy, I'll send you a link.
Okay, thanks.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye-bye. And I'm not sure who ends the meeting, but